The truth you're avoiding about your own life. You already know what's wrong. That's the part no one talks about. Not the not knowing, but the knowing and still doing nothing. You've felt it in the middle of conversations you didn't want to have. In the silence after you said yes. When every part of you wanted to say no. In the way you pick up your phone, the moment something real starts to surface inside you. You know, you have always known, and that knowing sits in you like a stone you've learned to walk around instead of move. The question worth sitting with isn't, what should I change? It's, why do I keep pretending I don't see what I see? Because you do see it. You see it clearly. And that clarity is exactly what terrifies you. There's a version of yourself you've been quietly constructing for years. Not the real one, but the presentable one. The one that makes sense to other people. The one that fits into conversations without too much friction. You've become extraordinarily good at this. So good that some days you forget you built it. You respond with the right tone, but wear the right expression. To frame your life in the right narrative. And somewhere underneath all of that, the actual you watches. Not with anger, but with a kind of tired recognition. Because the actual you knows that what you're performing isn't a lie exactly. It's something more uncomfortable than a lie. It's a careful selection of truths, arranged to avoid the most important ones. Think about the last time someone asked you how you really were. Not a passing question, a real one. With silence behind it. Based for an honest answer. And notice what you did. You probably smiled first. You probably said good. What tight and busy. Something that closed the door politely, without slamming it. And then you redirected. You asked about them. Or you made a small joke. Or you shifted to something concrete and manageable. You did it so naturally that they didn't notice. But you noticed. Some part of you always notices. Here's the thing about avoidance that nobody explains properly. It doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels like being practical. It feels like being realistic. It feels like protecting yourself from unnecessary pain. The mind is extraordinarily sophisticated, if at rebranding its own cowardice into something that sounds like wisdom. You call it not overthinking. You call it moving on. You call it being the bigger person. And sometimes those things are exactly what they are. But sometimes they are just distance. With better vocabulary. You've built a very specific relationship with discomfort. You don't run from it dramatically. That would be too obvious. Instead, you domesticate it. You give it a smaller space to live in. And a corner of your awareness. Where it can exist without demanding too much. You let it hum in the background while you stay busy. But stay productive. Stay in motion. Because motion is the most socially accepted form of avoidance there is. Nobody questions a person who's always doing something. Nobody looks too closely at someone who seems to be handling things. And you have mastered the appearance of handling things. What's stranger is what you do with time alone. When it arrives, real silence. Unscheduled hours. But no one watching. You feel it almost immediately. Maybe a low-frequency discomfort. Or that doesn't have a name. So you fill it, not always with noise, sometimes with thought, but a very specific kind of thought, the kind that circles without landing, or that reviews the past, or rehearses the future, adds without ever arriving at the present. Because the present, the actual present moment, with nothing in it but you, is where the real conversation lives. And you've been postponing that conversation, for longer than you want to admit. The conversations you've been postponing aren't always dramatic. Sometimes it's a question as quiet as, is this actually what I want? Sometimes it's looking at a relationship you've been sustaining on habit and asking whether you'd choose it again. Today, with clear eyes. Sometimes it's sitting with the gap between the life you're living and the one you sense you were capable of. Not in a punishing way, just honestly. Those questions aren't dangerous, but you treat them like they are. And the reason you treat them like they are is because answering them would require you to do something with the answers. And doing something would mean disrupting the architecture of a life you've spent years making stable. Stability, that word does a lot of work in your internal world. You value it genuinely, but you also use it as a reason to not examine things that deserve examination. You've arranged your life around predictability, partly because the world is uncertain, and predictability is sane, but partly because uncertainty, of the real kind, the kind that comes from not knowing who you actually are, underneath your habits, is something you've never fully made peace with. You know what you do? You're less sure of what you are. And that gap between doing and being was where most of the quiet suffering lives. You've developed opinions about yourself, that you've never actually tested. You believe you're the kind of person who would do certain things, feel certain ways, make certain choices. But you believe this based on very old evidence, based on a version of yourself that existed in different circumstances, under different pressures, before certain things happened that you haven't fully processed. And you walk around with that self-image intact, not because it's accurate, but because revising it would mean looking at the revisions. And some of those revisions hurt. Some of them reveal not growth, but compromise, not strength, but endurance, not choice, but resignation dressed up as acceptance. That there's a particular kind of loneliness you feel. That has nothing to do with being alone. It visits in crowded rooms, in the middle of relationships that work on paper, in conversations that are pleasant and warm, and somehow leave you feeling more isolated than silence does. That loneliness is specific. It's the loneliness of being unseen by people who believe they know you, of performing connection without quite achieving it, of being liked for a version of yourself you privately know is curated. And the cruelest part of it is that you're responsible for the curation. You showed people the parts you chose to show. You can't fully blame them for not seeing what you hid. You've had moments, probably more than a few, where something brushed close to the real thing. A conversation that went deeper than you expected. A piece of art that hit somewhere undefended. A moment of stillness where something surfaced that you immediately covered over. Those moments weren't accidents. They were the actual texture of your interior life, trying to make contact with you. And your response, almost every time, was to move, to shift, to intellectualize it, or contextualize it, or file it under something to think about later, and then never return.